Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck for you, and just as a quick heads up, this is not a budget deck, although I do think it should be fairly easy to find substitutes for those expensive cards. But before that, just a quick reminder to please click like and subscribe if you enjoy my videos. We're well on our way to 1 million subscribers and every single click counts. And today's deck is going to be focused around Lara Croft, Tomb Raider. For 1 green, 1 blue, and 1 red, she's a legendary creature, Human Ranger 3/4 with first strike, reach, and whenever Lara Croft attacks, exile up to 1 target legendary artifact card or legendary land card from a graveyard and put a discovery counter on it. You may play a card from exile with a discovery counter on it this turn. It also has raid. At end of combat on your turn, if you attack this turn, create a treasure token. So this is a super unique commander. We've never seen anything quite like this in Temur, which I think is very exciting. It's super flavorful because it works specifically with legendary artifacts and lands, which are exactly what Lara Croft would be doing, exploring all these new places and finding treasure. I also love that you get a treasure if you attacked that turn, which is very nice. It also plays well because it will help you to cast stuff if you steal stuff from your opponent's graveyard, which Lara can do. However, we are going to be focusing mostly on taking stuff from our own graveyard because that just seems way easier to achieve. Our opponents are not necessarily going to be playing that many legendary artifacts or legendary lands, so we can just make sure that we always hit something when we exile stuff from our own graveyard. Lara has great stats for her cost as well, which means that it should be easy to attack with her early on. So without further ado, let's get started. And we're starting off with Academy Manufactor. We have a bit of a treasure package in this deck, so it's nice to get extra use out of them by making other artifacts. We also have a couple of ways to sacrifice artifacts for value, so this just works nicely. Birds of Paradise is a great way to ramp out our commander on turn 2. Whenever we have a 3-mana commander, I try to see if I can include these mana dorks. Delighted Halfling is basically going to do the same as Birds of Paradise, as is Elvish Mystic. They're all just going to ramp Lara Croft out on turn 2. Emery, Lurker of the Lock, fits perfectly in this deck. It's going to cost fairly cheap because we do run a lot of artifacts, and it's also going to mill us when it comes into play, which works perfectly with Lara. We also get to play artifacts from our graveyard, which again is something that we want to be doing. Faldorn Dreadwolf Herald works really nicely with Lara. Both sides of this card are perfect. Playing stuff from exile or having lands enter from exile works really well with our commander, and then we also have a way to pitch stuff to the graveyard that we can then use with her. Glowing Dwarf Emissary is going to work very nicely with all of the legendary cards that we're running, and we do have a treasure sub-theme, so this is just gravy. Goblin Engineer is going to be one of the best cards in the deck. We can search up any artifact we want, dump it into our graveyard, and then either reanimate it with one of our reanimate artifact effects, or just exile it with our commander so that we can play it. Goblin Welder works very well with all of the legendary artifacts that we're running, and it also works particularly well because we're running a bunch of treasures which we can sack to it. Inti, Seneschal of the Sun, is very powerful in this deck. Being able to discard a card whenever we attack is just what Lara wants. Do be aware that you can't target the card that you discard with Inti on the same turn. With Lara, you will have to wait till a future turn, but even so, this provides a ton of value in this deck. Joyer Weatherlight Captain is going to draw us an absolute mountain of cards with all the artifacts we're running in this deck. Jolene the Plunder Queen works very well with our commander and also puts all of those treasures we're making to really good use. Canine Mark 1 offers a little bit of protection for Lara, but it's also a card that we can keep bringing back from the graveyard with her, so it should be very hard to deal with, and it can also make her unblockable, which is something that we definitely want as well. Llanowar Elves is yet another version of Birds of Paradise to ramp Lara out on turn 2. Professional Facebreaker should make us a lot of treasures in this deck, but it also crucially gives us a great outlet to use those treasures that we're making. Reckless Fireweaver is great as a way to finish off the game by dealing damage to our opponents with all of the treasures and regular artifacts that we're running. Reki, the History of Kamigawa, works really nicely with all of those legendary artifacts that we're playing. It's going to draw us a lot of cards. So Ginger the Meal Ender fits this deck very well for multiple reasons. First, it's a legendary artifact, which means we can exile it and play it with Lara, but then also we're playing a treasure sub-theme, which means that this is going to get very big and scry a nice amount. Wolfgar of Icewind Dale works so nicely with what Lara is trying to do because we're going to get to trigger her ability twice when we attack with her. And Xorn is a really strong one because getting an extra treasure every time we make a treasure guarantees us at least 2 every time we attack with our commander. Moving on to sorceries, I want to quickly mention Faithless Looting, which is obviously great because we do want to be dumping artifacts into our graveyard. Reckless handling is also an all-star here because we can search up a large amount of cards in our deck, and we don't really care if we discard them randomly because that's where we want them to go anyway. For instance, I want to highlight Big Score and Unexpected Windfall. These are always good cards in red decks, but they fit particularly well here because they allow us to discard cards into our graveyard to get with Lara, and they also make us treasures, which are two things that this deck is doing. Frantic Search is another excellent card because it costs 0 mana basically, and it's going to allow us to dump cards in our yard whilst giving us some nice card selection. Moving on to enchantments, we have Mirrodin Besiege. This can either be a finisher or a way to come up the ground with 1/1s. Usually we're going to go for the Phyrexian mode because it just seems quite a bit better, and it can actually win us some gains now and then. Search for Azcanta fits really well with what the deck is doing because it's going to allow us to dump stuff into our graveyard if that's what we wanted and dig deeper. Storm the Vault is a pet card of mine and it fits so nicely in this deck. We're almost always going to have 5 or more artifacts, which means that this is just going to become a Tolarian Academy, which, as you know, is a pretty fair magic card. Moving on to artifacts, we have Anduril, Flame of the West. This provides us some bodies when it attacks, which is nice, and since it's almost always going to be equipped onto our commander, they actually get to apply some pressure to our opponents at the same time. Anduril also works very nicely. We should almost always have the City's Blessing, which means that this is going to grow our board massively every time we attack with it. Fighting the Thassa should be drawing us a few cards in this deck, and then it can also force our opponent's creatures to attack. Bitterthorn comes with a body attached, but it's mostly there just for the amazing ramp effect. Blackblade Reforged is great when equipped onto Lara due to her first strike. It makes her very difficult to block profitably. Ball of Nylea is another card that makes her very difficult to block profitably because she's going to have Death Touch, and then it has 4 very flexible modes which are all quite good. Brass's Tunnel Grinder I really like in this deck. It's great that we get to dump a bunch of cards and draw a bunch of cards with the front side of this, but then the back side is also going to allow us to discover, which is really solid, and we're descending almost every turn with this deck. Embercleave is a really powerful one because we can blow people out after they've committed to blocking Lara, and giving Trample is a nice way to finish the game. Hammer of Nazan is going to work very well with the equipment sub-theme that we're running. Hammer of Perfrost can be good in the mid-game to give Lara and our other creatures haste. Lightning Greaves can protect our commander a little bit and make sure that she doesn't need a removal. Matsalantli the Great Door is another really good filtering card that I like a lot in this deck. Drawing and discarding every turn seems really good, and when it finally flips, it's going to add so much mana. Mithril Coat can provide protection to our commander at instant speed. Palantir of Orthanc is a really powerful card in this deck because no matter what mode they choose, we're going to be getting some really good card selection, or they're going to be taking a lot of damage. RMS Titanic is a little bit clunky, but as long as we have a couple of creatures out, it's not that bad. Preferably, we don't want to use our commander to crew this because we do want to be attacking with her every turn. Shadow Spear is going to be nice to gain us a little bit of life, and it's a cheap one to cast with Lara. Stone of Eric gives us a little bit of graveyard hate to guarantee that our opponents are playing fair, and we can also sack it to draw a card and then just cast it again next turn with Lara and kind of keep looping this if we need to. Sword of the Animist is going to be another good way to ramp up onto our late game. Tenza Godo's Maul is very efficient for all of the stats it gives our commander. It's going to give her Trample and +3/+3 for just 1 mana to equip, which is incredibly good value. The Belligerent is another decent vehicle that we want to not crew with our commander if at all possible. Getting the treasures is particularly nice from this card. The Everflowing Well is a good one to cast with Lara, particularly if we have ways to sacrifice it and then cast it again from the graveyard. It's really good to draw 2 and mill 2. The Indomitable is just another Bident of Thassa effect, but it's one that can attack. The Iron Crag works really nicely by giving us ramp early and then late game transforming into a weapon that we can equip to our commander. The One Ring is absolutely broken in most Magic formats. What can I say about this card? This is just a very, very powerful effect. The Reaver Cleaver should provide us a mountain of treasures and actually gives Trample, which is something we really want as well. And Umezawa's Jita is surprisingly only $6 these days, and it's just a very powerful artifact that comes down for very cheap. Moving on to Planeswalkers, we're running Daretti, Scrap Savant. All of the modes in this are incredibly relevant in this deck. Drawing and discarding is great. Sacrificing an artifact to reanimate an artifact is also really good. And then if we ever get to the ultimate, then we're really set. Moving on to lands, I wanted to highlight Academy Ruins, which is obviously very good with all of the artifacts we're running. Boseiju, Who Endures is great because we can get into the graveyard first and then then exile it with our commander to play it. Desolate Lighthouse is a good way to put stuff into the graveyard. Gaia Reach Sanitarium works really nicely by again allowing us to put cards into our graveyard. Hall of the Bandit Lord is there purely because late game we might need another way to give our commander haste, but it's not great if you draw it early. Inventor's Fair should gain us quite a bit of life in this deck and can actually search up a nice artifact late game. Mines of Moria has a little bit of synergy with our deck because it can make treasures. Okina is a nice way to buff our commander and we can sometimes catch people out with it. Otawara is more interaction that we can then replay from the graveyard. Rogue's Passage can guarantee that our commander gets through and can actually give us a way to win the game with commander damage late game. Answer Kenzan Crucible of Defiance can be great in this deck. We get 2 bodies and then we get to recast the land from the graveyard. So there you have it. This has been my Lara Croft Tomb Raider deck tech. This is a very wheel spinning kind of deck that I really like the look of, and I will probably put it together as soon as my Secret Lair arrives, which should be anytime soon, I hope. What do you think about this one? Are there any cards you would add or any cards you think I shouldn't have included? Let me know in the comment section below. I read all comments and respond to all of them too.
And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care.